This is Town Square Sunday on demand. And now, 1420 WBSM's Jim Phillips.
Good morning and welcome to Town Square Sunday. I'm Jim Phillips. This program airs every Sunday morning and focuses on individuals and organizations working to make the SouthCoast a better place to live and work. Sadly, the opioid crisis is still with us in Massachusetts. According to state health records, opioid-related deaths in 2022 total more than 2,100. In 2023, preliminary estimates show we're right there, some 2,000 plus opioid-related deaths last year. Despite all the education, all the warnings, all the steps taken in the last few years, the grim numbers are still with us. Here to talk about the opioid crisis in our area is Carl Alves, the Chief Executive Officer of PAACA, People Acting Against Chemical Addiction in New Bedford. Carl is also affiliated with SouthCoast Behavioral Health Hospital in Dartmouth. Carl, it's good to see you again.
Oh, it's good to be here with you.
Well, Carl, the number of deaths are still quite high statewide. Even one is obviously too many, but we're still getting over 2,000 people dying because of overdose using opioid drugs, some laced with fentanyl and other terrible kinds of toxic chemicals. What's some of the reasons why? I mean, we've been talking about opioids now for a good long time.
long time. Sadly, and it's evolved a bit.
Yeah.
Back in the early 2000s, it was more about prescription drugs. The community came together and changed some policies. Healthcare providers have changed that. And so now the prescription system is better, and there is less addiction as a result of that. Unfortunately, the cartels have gotten better too. And so they've been more sophisticated in the development of their drugs. And so as opposed to the organic heroin, everything's pretty much fentanyl now. Yeah. And it is chemically based, so there's no growing seasons, there's no picking. It is all done in a lab, and they're a lot of times putting it in pill form. So people think they're taking a prescription that they bought off the street, but it's actually, a drug, illicit drug dealer source.
Yeah. And here in New Bedford, in Greater New Bedford, it is the tentacles of the cartel I think they've always been here, really, but
there's a presence. There's no question. There's a presence. I mean, it's a big business, especially now that everything is so chemically driven because the profit margins are just so extraordinary. And unfortunately, the substances themselves are becoming that much more addictive. There are new, as you mentioned in your opening, there are other chemicals that are being put into these drugs, such as xylazine, which is an animal tranquilizer. Now that's emerging with new health-related challenges because it wasn't designed for humans. It has a negative effect, big abscesses, people that are, big wounds that are just emerging because of the drug, the side effect of the drugs, and it's creating new health concerns for folks. And so, the ready availability of it, the potency of it, and the nature of the addiction to it are just kind of feeding. And so that's why we're seeing those numbers. But we're also seeing a lot of numbers of non-fatal overdoses. And that's partly because the numbers could be significantly higher than they are. But there's a lot of outreach. There are substances like naloxone, which is a reversal. So people aren't dying at a rate as fast as it could be. It's still unfortunate.
Yeah. So are you seeing all of that in New Bedford?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And I think it's exacerbated because a lot of young people are affected. I mean, the number one cause of death for people under the age of 46, I believe, is overdose, and that is tragic because we're losing a generation of people. And addiction is difficult, but recovery is also real. people are recovering. And I think we got to kind of talk about that as well. It doesn't have to be a life sentence, but it's not going to be solved with a pill. It requires, support. It requires discipline. It requires a community, families, to kind of, when somebody is addicted, to recognize it, not be ashamed of it, but do something about it.
So, when I was still in the news business, I read a lot about fentanyl in my last decade of doing news. And fentanyl has only become much more deadly, much more toxic.
Absolutely.
Because of the synthetically produced pills. Tell me, are the reversal drugs like Narcan, can they work against these?
They do, but it might require more Narcan or repeated doses to get the same result as we used to have in years past. And unfortunately, Narcan doesn't work against xylazine, which is the new substance that's added to fentanyl that extends the high, but it also kind of paralyzes the system. So, it's got some really negative consequences as a result.
Okay. So I know that you at PAACA and others are working diligently on this problem every day. At PAACA, your job is recovery.
We're a little bit of everything. We've got some prevention. We've got the youth services that are in the schools, working with great school departments in the area to try to provide some positive resources. And when young people are struggling, people are struggling with vapes. And that kind of stuff. Those are the precursors to, other kinds of addictions. And, so we're trying to help young people develop, the positive resiliency so that they can address this and if it shows up in their life. Plus, a lot of young people are dealing with addiction in their home, that of a family member or a parent, loved one. So there's that. We also do a lot of work with folks that are on the streets, that are experiencing homelessness, folks that are experiencing mental health related conditions. But our best work is in recovery, trying to help people who want to make a change to help them make that change. And there's a lot of different options for that. It's not easy, but it is possible.
And of course, we've all heard in the past, well, somebody is not going to take that path unless they want to. How can we all help them along?
Yeah, I've been doing this a long time. So, since I was a volunteer with the organization on the board in 91, and I've been there ever since. I think, not everybody just sees the light one day. Sometimes folks need to feel the heat from the light in order to kind of move forward. But regardless, we've got a really state-of-the-art drug court program. So folks that are incarcerated or in the criminal justice system have access to treatment, which is a great development and working. I think the sheriff's doing some great work in terms of providing medically assisted treatment behind the wall, helping people develop better habits or patterns or the supports that they need so that when they get out, they're more likely to be successful. I think that, treatment providers, they're access to treatment more than ever before. The key is that there is no simple fix. So just going into a treatment facility for a week or 2 weeks is not going to solve a problem. It is the beginning. It's like being in an emergency room. You get it set, you get stabilized. If you don't do the physical therapy afterwards or you don't do the medication afterwards and stuff like that, you're going to have limited, success.
You're listening to Town Square Sunday. I'm Jim Phillips, and my guest is Carl Alves, the Chief Executive Officer at PAACA, People Acting Against Chemical Addiction. Before we started this interview, we were talking about what you feel is the number one issue for your population, with people you work with, and that's housing.
Yeah.
Housing is, important for all of us, including people in recovery or attempting to get to that state. Tell us about what.
Well, we're seeing, more and more people becoming homeless because they're being displaced because they can't afford the current rise in rents, those types of things. There are not a whole lot of permanent housing options for folks to kind of get what they need to stay on the straight and narrow. And, we're seeing an aging of our population. People are just getting older. We just had a case the other day of, the women and men in their 60s, 70s that are living on the streets and might have mental health issues or addiction issues. But, again, that undermines all the progress we're making in our community. There's so many great things with, the wind and downtown and those types of things. We need to do more for folks that are struggling on the streets, because ultimately it is an economic development issue, because if something were to happen, that could really undermine a lot of the in terms of violence, those kinds of things. It would be very tragic and difficult for our business community. So we really need to do something.
All right. So what do we need to do, and who needs to do it?
I think we all need to do something. I think people. I think we need local investors to open their homes and partner with nonprofits to create space for people in recovery. A lot of times landlords don't want to touch it, don't want to take a Section 8, don't want to do these kinds of things just because the perceived risk. Yeah. And so we need to kind of find ways where landlords can be supported. We've done that in a number of places where we provide support to the landlords so they can do their landlord thing, but also get support so that people can live there. And if people, make mistakes, as people do, then at least there's some positive supports there. And if ultimately there has to be a removal, then, they've got support for that as well. Try to reduce the risk of being a landlord. I think that because there's a lot of unrented apartments. There's a lot of folks that don't want to rent because they don't want the aggravation of it all. And I think we're seeing a lot of outside investment, out of town investment, which creates very much a transactional relationship with folks. And that creates its own set of problems.
This particular circumstance you described,
yes.
You have some success stories with it?
Absolutely. I mean, we've run our Step Up program since the late 90s. And over that period of time, so many people, probably about 80% of our population, have gone on to independent living and, taken over their units and lived productive lives. Many of them have become landlords themselves. Many of them have, they've turned their lives around. Sometimes you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and that's the sweet spot where you can do the work that's necessary to live a life of recovery.
Okay, so what I'm talking about really is these landlord situations. You want people to open their homes to help people get started on that
yes,
road.
Right.
Is that happening?
It is happening in some way. It's partnerships. Yeah. It's partnerships with landlords. It's partnerships with folks, the developers, to kind of create space for people that are moving forward. And we've got to look at alternative ways to, house people in a safe and neighborhood-friendly way. One of the things I'd love to see is for us to create a recovery district, a section in town where we would just really concentrate investment in terms of recovery homes, where everybody in a particular neighborhood would be recovery focused. Recovery is a great thing. If somebody's in recovery, they're good tenants, they're not drinking, they're not, there's so many positive things, and I think we need to embrace those strengths.
So the Healy administration, she was on this week, talked a lot about housing, not so much about addiction, but she obviously housing
mental health is big on her list.
Is really a top priority. I've also read where she is backing supervised consumption sites in Massachusetts. Now, I think we've gone through this here in New Bedford. We've at least talked about it.
Well, there's been some motions against it already. So yeah. So
give me the argument for these sites, because I think people are just afraid. I mean, from the people on the ground here, we're just afraid. we don't know exactly
That's
what this
right.
is all
I
about.
understand that. You see, and sometimes the behaviors that come with addiction are difficult. But what the consumption sites are, supervised consumption sites are, is just rather than getting high in a fast food restaurant or in a public bathroom, it is the safer place where there's medical professionals so that we do that. In places where they occur, there's never been in many cases, it's less than 1%, if any overdoses. So it's carefully monitored. Plus, it creates a venue where people can learn to trust, get some supports. Because what happens is people get moved along, or they get incarcerated, and that sort of thing. Everything is very transactional, and it takes time for people to kind of develop trust and belief in their own selves in order to do the work necessary. So it's an opportunity for connection. I mean, it's not an argument that I make locally because there's so much opposition at this time, and I'd rather focus on let's create more housing. And, if that becomes an option later, it did. It's just like needle exchange. Yeah. It was vicious, not vicious, but I mean, strong opposition to it in the mid-'90s. And then the state intervened and made them legal, and we're seeing a lot less difficulty with people getting stuck by needles, HIV transmission as a result, that sort of thing. So, I mean, there are positive things that might seem counterintuitive. People might think, well, you're just enabling. Well, you're actually enabling relationship. And it's relationship that's going to help people kind of move forward.
Legislature. Yeah. Any sign they're going to sign on to this thing at some point?
I really don't know. I can't answer that question. But what I can say, our local delegation, Chris Hendricks, Tony Cabral, are real advocates for mental health, on housing, trying to be inclusive in their decision making and trying to move forward. So I think that there are a lot of different things that need to happen simultaneously, and I'm confident about our local delegation and beyond, not just New Bedford, they're doing the right thing.
Tell us about your role with the SouthCoast Behavioral Health Group.
SouthCoast Behavioral Health is, I'm just a consultant with them and work with the team in the business development office. And they've been very supportive in terms of creating educational forums, opportunities for the community to come together and learn about mental health, talk about and strategize different ways that we can make life better for folks. We've seen an increase in the number of beds. Just recently, almost 200 beds at that facility in Foxcroft, which is relatively new. And Child and Family has also expanded with their behavioral health center, which has been tremendously helpful, especially for parents that are struggling with children with mental health. There's some real resources here. But again, same kinds of problems is that, short-term treatment, that sort of thing is helpful to minimize the crisis. But we need to kind of look a little bit longer term and have more community-based options.
We haven't solved the problem, Carl, but it's good to talk
We're
about
recognizing it today, and to thank you, for bringing this forward, because the more we talk about it, the closer we get to better solutions.
Carl Alves has been my guest. He is the CEO of PAACA and also affiliated with SouthCoast Behavioral Health in Dartmouth. Carl, good to see you again, and we'll stay, hopefully this time next year, maybe you can have more positive news for us. All right, Carl Alves, thank you. Stay with us. Town Square Sunday will continue in just a moment.